The worst serial killer in human history was Joan of Arc's right-hand man. He violently sodomized all of his victims. A common thread throughout Gilles de Rais' murders was the act of forcefully sodomizing his victims. An eager necrophile, he carried out this heinous act both before and after the death of the children he lured back to his manse. Though he primarily kidnapped and killed young boys, he also snatched the occasional girl, whom he would sodomize just the same, citing a disdain for her natural vessel as his reasoning. He psychologically tortured his young victims and sometimes made them watch each other. A killer with an insatiable appetite, de Rais would often begin his ritualistic killings by providing kidnapped children with clothes and finery like they had never seen before and plying them with alcohol. Then, he would strip them and hang them from the ceiling until they lost consciousness, eventually taking them down and assuring them he meant no harm after masturbating on their bodies, among other unspeakable acts. From there, the children were violently sexually assaulted before mercifully being decapitated or having their throats cut, ear to ear. Sometimes, he kidnapped his victims in pairs of two, so that one would have to watch as the other went through this horrific process. Once they were bound, he masturbated on his victims. A pure sexual sadist, Gilles de Rais got supreme enjoyment out of imposing sexual hell on his victims. He would frequently bind his young male victims and masturbate onto their stomachs and thighs before killing them. He also employed this practice on his occasional young female victims in bizarre ways, frequently rubbing himself between their thighs, citing that he found more pleasure and less pain than acting in nature. Occasionally, after they had been killed and partially disemboweled, he would ejaculate into their entrails. He severed his victims' heads while they were still alive after kidnapping, pampering, and treating his victims to an exquisite meal and expensive alcohol. De Rais would take a violent turn and put his victims through a living nightmare. After violently raping and torturing his victims with a variety of implements, he would, of course, be compelled to kill them for fear of word getting out about his violent proclivities. Though he used various methods of accomplishing the murder of his captives, his most common way of snuffing out life was decapitation. De Rais even had a special sword called a braquemard that he would use to saw off the heads of his victims, who were often still alive when the blade entered their throats. He kept the heads of his hands victims, and he frequently kissed the Gilles de Rais, escapade sadist that he was. Greatly admired beauty. He frequently sought out only the most handsome young boys, as his violent impulses were very sexual in nature. After the ordeal of torturing, killing, and mutilating his victims, de Rais often kept a trophy to commemorate the occasion, not unlike modern serial killers. Gilles de Rais trophies, however, were not merely small tokens, they were often entire severed heads. He would keep the handsomest victims' heads on a mantle, where he would frequently visit and kiss the decomposing lips of his deceased victims. He offered eyes and hearts as demon sacrifices. Gilles de Rais sadist, pedophile, murderer, cannibal, necrophile was a man with an accomplished and grisly criminal resume, but beyond that, he was also rumored to be a practicing Satanist. In reality, though, It's difficult to say how many of the accusations leveled against de Rais were accurate reflections of his behavior and how many of them were scurrilous, politically motivated charges. Regardless, when de Rais, who was at one point the richest man in Europe, ran into financial troubles, he turned to the outlawed practice of alchemy to reverse his fortunes. After locating a magician named Fontainelle who claimed to be able to conjure a demon called Baron, de Rais began making offerings to appease the demonic spirit, frequently presenting severed eyes, ears, hearts from his victims to the minion of the Dark Lord. In a post-coital haze, he had his servants dismember his victims, so strong was his lust for sex and violence. De Rais was often left incapacitated, falling unconscious at the completion of his bloody acts. After he had killed and mutilated his victims, he would frequently sodomize the corpse, taking such pleasure in the act that he would faint upon reaching orgasm. At this point, his servants would carry him off to his bed, where he would rest while they were left to dismember and dispose of the bodies. He was very into necrophilia. It was not enough for Gilles de Rais to kidnap his young, destitute victims and separate them from any family they had. It was not enough for him to torture and sexually abuse them, either. The act of murdering his terrified, agony-stricken captives also failed to satiate his sadistic desires. It was in the post-mortem, in fact, that de Rais may have gotten the most enjoyment out of the bodies of those he violated. While he sodomized and defiled his dead victims, he also took pleasure in watching them be disemboweled. He, allegedly, took delight at the sight of their inner organs. He took sexual gratification from watching his victims slowly die. De Rais clearly got off on the pain of his victims. He took great pleasure in watching his victims suffer, so much so that when he wasn't raping them, he frequently took to masturbation in their final moments. De Rais would also sit on the stomachs of young victims as he cut their throats, reveling in the blood that trickled down from their throats. He would then remain in a squatting position, pleasuring himself, as he watched the life slowly leave their eyes. He had the victims' bodies burned and thrown in cesspools. So what does one do with the dismembered, disemboweled, sexually violated bodies of many children? If one was Gilles de Rais, then disposing of them is somebody else's jobs. After he committed his dark acts, climaxing in becoming unconscious, de Rais would have his servants burn his victims' bodies. Those that he didn't burn ended up in cesspools or with their heads on display in his personal collection.